can be stored, and then you get these lower ones in blue. So I'm very optimistic that there are real opportunities based on quite a bit of experience to produce combined first and second generation ethanol, in many cases with continued cogeneration of electricity, such that you can sell the products for less than they are sold today. I do not think that can be done today, but I think it can be done soon. Another perspective on this is to follow the energy. So this is based on 100 units of energy coming in cane, and there are different ways that you can use a combination of trash and cane. What's shown here, this is for our scenario 4, is all of the bagasse goes to second generation ethanol, and there is 30% as much or 29% as much energy as in the cane in the trash. Of that, 2/3, in order to keep the plant in energy balance, 2/3 goes to steam and power generation, and 1/3 goes to second generation ethanol. When you're all done in this case, you make 30% of the feedstock energy as that's this feedstock energy, even though this contributes, as second generation ethanol, and about 37% as first generation ethanol. So that's the 81% increase. And then you have to use these residues to provide the steam and the electricity for the entire process. Now, if you make the steam and electricity demands of this process less, then less of the cane trash, all set, thanks, Jaime, then less of the cane trash needs to go here and more can go through second generation ethanol. That's going to be an economic optimization that will play out over time. Now, let me see if I can back this up, because, oh boy. Let's start there. So Brazil currently produces approximately 26 billion liters per year of ethanol, and there is quite a bit more land available, according to your own studies, that could potentially be used for ethanol. This one is information provided by Brito Cruz in an article that I worked on with several colleagues associated with the Global Sustainable Bioenergy Project, which came out in the Royal Interface Journal in 2011, that 60 million hectares of land that are currently occupied with degraded pasture could be used to grow sugarcane with no significant impact on environment and biodiversity. So you might not get exactly the same sugar yield, but if you take as an approximation 15 times, you would be up to 390 billion liters. Now, I've shown that under some circumstances, and I believe this potential will be realized eventually, that second-generation ethanol could double the yield per cane as it's grown today. It's also the case that if you had cost-effective cellulosic processing technology, you would be able to produce sugar cane with more cellulose and somewhat less sugar, provided the economics were there, and that is potentially approximately another twofold increase. So this is twice the amount of gallons per ton as the feedstock's grown now, and this is twice the amount of tons per acre or per hectare due to growing a energy crop that's optimized for its production rather than for its processability, assuming you can develop inexpensive processing technology. It's interesting to compare that to a couple of benchmarks. So the first one is global gasoline production, and the second one is the gasoline equivalent production from Saudi Arabia. And I don't present this as anything that's going to be realized next week or next year or even in a decade, but I think this is the kind of potential that's out there. And I will close by pointing out that there is something approaching a fourfold multiplier in going from the potential of first-generation ethanol using cane as it's grown today to second-generation ethanol using cane optimized for productivity, which would be allowed by second-generation technology. So I think Brazil, and these are just Brazilian numbers here, the bottom four, I think Brazil has a heck of an opportunity, and I look forward to working with many of you to do what I can to help make that happen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lee, for your beautiful presentation and for sticking to the time. Michael, you have the flow. Please introduce yourself and try to keep it 10 minutes. No, it's not here. Unfortunately, you have to add advance here and go back here. Okay. This is not running.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to get to try to keep you awake after you finished your lunch, halfway through this hour-and-a-half session. So let me say I'm Mike McAdams. I'm the president of the Advanced Biofuels Association. I came into biofuels through a 15-year career with BP, where I was the speechwriter and policy advisor for then Chairman Lord Browne. So I came out of this out of the downstream refining side of a large oil and gas company. I also spent a number of years, I worked for President Carter and a number of years on Capitol Hill. And so across my 30-year career, I focused on the interface between business and government, and born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I'm not even the rock star in my own house, as my wife worked for Al Gore and is the woman who put together the slideshow that became the movie The Inconvenient Truth. So she's the real power curve in my house. So what I want to do today is we were allowed 7 slides. I have 10 minutes. I'm going to do a massive data dump and then look forward to having questions and interaction with the panel and with you. Let me tell you who the Advanced Biofuels Association is. We're 36 companies from all over the world. We're all second generation by definition. So every one of the fuels that every one of my companies makes falls under the Advanced Biofuels pool under the RFS in the United States. We represent a wide swath of technology platforms. About a third of the companies are cellulosic companies. About a third of the companies are sugar fermentation companies. I have hydroprocessing companies, some of the best in the world, such as Neste, Honeywell, UOP, Tyson Foods, who's currently running a 75 million gallon plant in Louisiana. I have 2 of the sexiest algae companies in Sapphire out of California and Solazyme, who just went public. So we have a real, my challenge is to get them all to sing on the same song sheet, which is quite a challenge, believe me, from a day-to-day basis on public policy. So first of all, our ethos in the association is technology neutrality, feedstock neutrality, and give everybody a level playing field in terms of grants, loan guarantees, tax policies, give everybody a level playing field to play from. The second thing I wanted to do in this slideshow is I want to talk a little bit, because everywhere in the world I go, people are confused about how to compare apples to apples in the advanced biofuel space. And there are a lot of really talented, smart people, you've seen a couple of them already in this presentation, who really can promote their technologies and give you a great commercial presentation. But after it's over, I find, particularly in the public policy arena, people are confused as to what are the variables or the elements that they need to look at in comparing what it is we ought to be doing and why. I call it the pretty girl syndrome, where one gal's got a great pair of shoes and the other one's got a great purse and a third one's got a great hairdo, but none of them have got all 3. So when you look in the biofuels world, and we could rename this conference from the Ethanol Summit to the Biofuels and Bioproducts Conference, we are moving in a different age of molecules, and you have to, as both consumers, government policymakers, and investors, you've got to be able to kind of put things head-to-head to make your analysis. So I've come up with a very simple, kind of idiot-proof model to start that Q&A so that you could do your own evaluation, so you don't have to have somebody tell you what's good or what's bad. And it goes like this. You start with asking the question, what is the technology? What are we doing here? Are we doing dry mill ethanol? Are we doing thermochemical? Are we doing fermentation? Are we doing synthetic bio? What is the machine? What is the machine doing? The second thing we're going to ask ourselves is, what are we putting in the machine? So what's the feedstock we're using in the machine? And then the third question that completely confounded the Senate Environment Committee when I testified was, what's the molecule coming out? You say the word molecule, you'll scare any public policymaker anywhere in the world. So what are the molecules? Well, in the world of molecules, since we've done transportation fuels in the last 150 years, there's only been 4 molecules we've ever used in the transportation pool. One is alcohol. The one we know best is ethanol. Now we have things like isoprene and butanol and other heavier dense alcohols. Another is an ether. Well, we used to have methyl tertiary butylethylene in the United States. We have that no longer. But that was an ether. A third one's an ester. That, by definition, under U.S. law, is biodiesel. That is an ester. It has an oxygen molecule attached to it. And the last, the one we know the best, comes from a barrel of oil that goes through a refinery, and it makes a hydrocarbon molecule. The wonderful thing about the technologies of tomorrow, which are in the room today with you, is a lot of these guys have figured out how to take a machine, put a renewable feedstock in it, and make a hydrocarbon drop-in molecule that is totally fungible in today's planes, trains, and automobiles through the existing infrastructure. It's caught on, it's gotten a lot of excitement, and now policymakers all over the world, when they look at advanced molecules, be they advanced or cellulosic, now understand that that might be a component they're interested in. So the next thing I want to quickly do, and then I want to spend the bulk of my time on public policy, is say, what are the 5 things, if you were making a biofuel, what are the 5 things that you'd really like to be able to brag about? This is the purse, the shoes, and the hair, okay? So you'd want a molecule that's heavy, energy dense, so you could drive as far on it as you used to on the molecule that came out of a barrel of oil. The second thing you'd want is you'd want it to be environmentally advantaged. Now, environmentally advantaged, if I have the Sierra Club here and I have my friend from Exxon up here, they're going to differ in terms of what public policy ought to do in terms of delivering environmental advantage. But water, land use, clean air, ground level ozone, greenhouse gas footprint, these are all variables that fit into a public policy stakeholder discussion on what is environmentally advantaged. A third thing you might want is fungibility. That way you don't have to completely change the whole automobile fleet, and you don't have to completely change 162,000 gas stations in the United States with blenders, pumps, and new hoses and new machines. You might want a fungible molecule. That would be an advantage. That's not to say you wouldn't want to continue to use ethanol, which has delivered more gallons in the United States, 14 billion gallons, than any other renewable. It's the shoulders we stand on today. So it is a very important component piece of a diverse energy portfolio for both Brazil and the United States. The last thing you'd want is you make a lot of it. And you want to be able to take a lot of that feedstock abundantly and form it into one of those molecules. And lastly, you'd want to be able to afford to buy it. And that is a challenge, and you need to ask people, and a lot of the presentations that have preceded me have talked about how you can economically drive these advanced molecules into an economically competitive space with the current price of oil today. Now let me flip to policy, my favorite, my love. All right, so what I wanted to do and what they asked me to do was talk to you a little bit about the framework of public policy in the United States. Then I've got a slide on the MOU with Brazil, but let me spend the bulk of my time here. So you heard the speakers from the oil companies with Vinod, and you heard all the speakers yesterday afternoon talk about, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had certainty in public policy? Now, when I get done running through this data dump, if you are all scratching your heads and asking whether or not this is rational or not, you understood everything I said. So please just bear with me a second. So what we have now is the single most important tool in the United States for bringing all biofuels into the marketplace and creating that diverse portfolio is the Renewable Fuel Standard. It was passed in 2007. My most famous slide is the one on the right. It depicts how the RFS-2 works. It is a very complicated piece of legislation. The rulemaking process was 186 pages when the final rule came down. And what it did is it created 4 buckets in the fuels law that mandates. Okay? So we have a conventional ethanol bucket that's 15 billion gallons. We have an advanced biofuels bucket, which is 21 billion gallons. Within the advanced biofuels bucket, we have 2 pools that are nested that go to the overall target of the RFS-2. One is the biomass-based diesel bucket. That bucket was negotiated to be technology neutral between biodiesel and renewable diesel or replacement diesels. So it is a tech-neutral bucket which excludes co-processing. That means if you take a renewable oil and you co-process it through a hydroprocessing unit or a hydrotreater, you're going to get excluded and you're going to default to the advanced biofuels pool. The 4th bucket is the cellulosic bucket. To be in that bucket, you have to be a hemicellulosic or lignocellulosic feedstock. So that's a feedstock-defined bucket. Now, all of these buckets, we've laid over the bucket. All of these buckets are internested with the overall mandate, which is about 13 billion gallons this year, just to make it easy, with an energy density and equivalency formula, which was brought forward from RFS-1. That means you look at the BTU value of all of these molecules and the renewable components, and we assign a value called a RIN credit, Renewable Identification Number. In order for you to sell any renewable fuel in the United States, then you have to have a RIN credit, or the obligated parties, which are the major oil companies, will not want to buy your fuel because it will not be compliant with the mandates under the federal law across the